or at the bottom of the funnel? So at the top of the funnel, when you're focusing on things like getting people to register, I just want to get them to my website and get them to register. That's the sort of the click or page views. Are they coming to my website? Are they looking at the pages on my website? And that sort of top of funnel, I think, he says the point there is that you have a lot of information, but it's not very good quality. Because I don't know anything about the conversion or success rate if I'm simply focused at the top of the funnel. What he also argues, though, is that some companies overcompensate. And so they end up looking just at conversions. And so what they do is they see a relatively few data points. They just see those conversions that take place, but they haven't really got as much insight as to how they got there. That's why he says mid-funnel metrics matter. He said that somewhere along this process, there are intermediate steps that are more indicative of the value for the potential conversion of your customers. What do they do after they register on your website? Or after they call your business for the first time and ask about it? What is it that they need to know? Because that information helps you to customize the way in which you address customers who arrive from different sources or who are looking, responding to different marketing activity. At LogMeIn, they looked at something called trials. And they realized that what they could do was they could encourage people to take a different kind of a trial. That trial was a better indicator of ultimate conversion. Now, everything they did with respect to sign-up was designed to help maximize those people who got to a quality trial. And then from quality trial, what they tried to do is optimize the conversion at the bottom of the funnel. Different steps along the way. And I would argue, and I've told my students the same thing, is that if you think about customer acquisition as a 0-1 discrete event, you don't have much to work with. Think of it as a path. It's a journey. And all sorts of things happen. People are thinking, and the way they think when they make their decision is a potential way for you as a marketer to influence their behavior. So if I could sort of say what are some of the implications here, I would say customer acquisition seldom happens in one fell swoop. It's not like you're there on Google, you click on an ad, and suddenly you're buying a product. There's lots of steps, and as a marketer, you need to understand what those steps are. What Steve said, don't focus too much on a high conversion rate. So he was a great believer that if you focused just on the leads that were most likely to close, it would be too narrow. You'd actually be under generating demand in terms of your potential. And so in the early stages, he said, it actually sometimes makes sense to spend more on customer acquisition because it's an investment in learning at the same time it's an investment in building your customer base. So think about the ways in which you can learn about the process and optimize at each of the sub-steps of the process. Okay. Number 3 is Ed Baker. And Ed is, kind of famous around Stanford. He was not one of my students, but while he was taking a Stanford course, he got the idea for this company called Friend.ly. It's a social Q&A site. They ended up with 25 million users. They ended up selling out to Facebook and so on. I would argue that it is a very successful entrepreneurial venture. They had a good exit strategy and so on. And what it did was it turned Ed Baker into this kind of guru in the Valley. He ended up now going on to Uber, where he is the head of growth at Uber. And Uber, which was mentioned, it hasn't been mentioned yet, but people may talk about it, but it's sort of a peer-to-peer taxi type service. So what would he say? And what Ed Baker's lesson for my students was leverage virality. He said, think of each of your users as an agent who has an incentive to share his or her network of friends with the marketer. I think there's huge potential for virality, and it has a major impact on your customer acquisition strategy. So let's talk a little bit about it. I'm going to use a framework that Ed presents to my students. He talks about something called a virality factor, and he has a simple formula for it. So when you see on blogs and the internet and so on, Andrew Chen has a very influential blog, and he talks about growth and virality. They talk about this K factor. Hey, what's your K factor? Have you optimized your K factor? Well, what is the K factor? K factor is actually a product of 3 terms. The first term here is just the adoption rate. So that is, for somebody who's aware of your product, how likely are they to become a customer, to actually choose it? It's what comes after that that is the virality. Y is then the probability that they decide to share their experience with someone else. And Z is the number of people that they share it with. So think of this as the likelihood of adoption, this as the expected number of shares that come from each of your users. So why is the K factor so important? Well, let's use a little math to illustrate what it looks like. This is what your customer acquisition growth looks like for 2 different values of K. This blue line right here, that's a K factor of 0.8. Turns out that's less than 1. Here, this is a K factor of 1.2, right, which is greater than 1. So I start here and say, what's the growth that I can expect from adding 1 customer in period 1? And I look 20 periods hence. That's the difference. It all hinges around this idea of viral growth. If that K factor is greater than 1, it becomes self-sustaining. Each additional person adds more people, and so it sort of blows up like this. Now, the thing I find is that too many people get hung up on K being greater than 1. They think, oh, well, that's going to be our goal. We have to get viral growth. We have to get everybody sharing this all the time. Especially when you plot it next to this. This is K equal 0.8. If you delivered a virality factor of 0.8, wouldn't you feel terrible compared to the guy who's got a 1.2? Doesn't it make you feel kind of like a failure? I mean, this looks so pitiful compared to this. So I want to make a point for the fact that any viral impact, any K factor, has the potential to lower the costs of customer acquisition for your business. So let's take a look here at some of the implications here. And I'll start up here. So K, this viral factor, reflects the reduction in cost of your paid acquisition efforts. So I just showed you something that's a K of 0.8. And you think, oh, well, that K of 0.8 only ends up with a very small level. Well, I will tell you that what that means is that if you have some virality at that level in your customer acquisition efforts, you've reduced your cost on a per customer basis by 80%. Your money goes 5 times as far with just some aspect of virality. Even if it's not self-sustaining, it makes you much more cost-effective. The secret, then, is to figure out what are the things that you can do to increase K. Even if you can't increase K to something greater than 1, you can increase K, drive your costs down, and have more resources available as an entrepreneur to spend on customer acquisition. So of these components, X is really mainly influenced by what I talked about before, this idea of product market fit. It's Y and Z that you're really trying to build in here. And what I would say here is you have to think about, how do I give people the incentive to share with my friends the product or service that I have used? Okay? So let me break this here. This is the other reason that I don't teach wearing a jacket. It's all these trips back and forth across the stage. They just get me all warmed up here. Okay. So my wife Marilyn and I recently did a 35th anniversary tour in the wine country north of San Francisco. And when we were there, we discovered what we thought was the just beautiful little winery. We'd never heard of it before. They had these lovely Zinfandel wines. We tried them, we enjoyed them, it was something great. So I went on social media and I bragged about it. I said, you know what? This was great. We found this, we felt it was special. I have a friend from college who lives in Washington State who saw my post and when visiting the valley went down to Mauritson Vineyards to enjoy their Zins. He said, these are the best I've ever had. He joined their wine club and spent $600 a year having wine shipped to him in Washington State. Now, how do they get access to my friend John Meyer, who lives up in Washington? No chance. Unless I have the incentive as a user to say, this was a special experience, and I know the people who would get a kick out of it, who would really find that useful too. Some businesses have more potential for sharing than others, but everyone has users who they can motivate or provide the incentives to talk about the ideas. When I get back from this trip, right, I'm bragging about True Grease. Had a great trip, did all these things, post my pictures. Will anybody pick it up? The fact is that if even only one or two of my friends pick it up, it's not a K factor greater than 1, but it is a cost of customer acquisition reduction that you couldn't pull off for any amount of money. There's no way that you could spend the money to reach the people who might come to you from my site. So there's a good lesson there. All right, last of the 4 lessons. This is from Kelly Bennett. Kelly is the CMO at Netflix. I don't think that Netflix has arrived in Greece yet, but you may have read about them or heard about them throughout the world. The reason I wanted to talk about Kelly was because Kelly has a lesson that has to do with activation, with customer activation, and it's something that has to go hand in hand with customer acquisition. It's not enough to just get customers to show up. You got to keep them engaged, right? Especially if you have a product or a subscription product of some kind, they got to keep using it. And so what Kelly said is, you know what? We know more about what our customers want than any network in the history of television. And we spend a lot of time trying to use that knowledge to get our existing customers to stream more product, that is, to use more of our product. Now, why would they do that? So here's the reason. They've studied this, and they know that they spend a lot of money on customer acquisition. And for customers who end up as Netflix users, if they stream less than 5 hours a month, there's a 90% chance that they'll drop the service. I've fudged these numbers a little for purposes of confidentiality, but they're on this order of magnitude. Among those who stream more than 15 hours per month, the probability of churn, that is, that they will leave, is reduced by 75%. So here's the thing. Do I want to spend a whole lot of money on acquiring customers who are then going to leave me with a 90% probability? I may never recover the investment that I make to bring them in. So in addition to acquisition, I have to learn what it is that these guys want to keep them engaged. That is a sort of an ongoing part of customer acquisition that is very important. Now, what Kelly talked about was he called this the secret sauce. But he says, you know what? We produce thematic trailers. And these thematic trailers are just like little video clips designed to pique the interest of our customers. The thing is that we develop lots and lots of different trailers and produce them, send them to people depending on their interests or their profiles. So we make it possible, for people to see things that are relevant to them. Now, it's not, the production of these trailers is probably expensive, but the actual marketing of them is not. This sort of digital marketing makes this kind of customization very straightforward and simple. So to sort of say, what are the implications of something like this, is that customer activation is the thing that provides you with a return on your investment for all the money you've spent on customer acquisition. I want to make sure that they continue to come back and do these things. The challenge for you as an entrepreneur is to figure out, how do I learn what it takes to engage my customers? The principles are this, is that every day I'm investing in learning who my customers are and what they want. So it's sort of, what would your thematic trailer be? How will you customize the engagement that you use with each of your customers to keep them engaged and to keep them coming back one time after another, right? Now, because we're running a little low on time here, what I wanted to do was end with that lesson. We have maybe 5 minutes before I'm turning things over to Peter. I don't know the format for question and answer, but I thought we could use a little bit of time for that now. I'll let you guys decide on how it's done. Okay. Okay. Right. Okay. So now, here it is. This is your chance. Talk about a taste of Stanford. You've got an opportunity now to say, oh, well, I've sort of sat in this class. I have a burning question about what I've presented or anything else. Is there anything that you want to raise for me? Yes? What? Estimates of why. Okay. So if we're thinking about viral marketing, right? So you said here, how do I estimate this? How do I estimate the probability of sharing? All right, so think about how you would do this. And this is something that may come up in Peter's talk too, as he's talked about the importance of, as I said, that venture capital who wants to invest in your business, they don't want to invest in your business unless you have some measurable results on how you can generate demand. So now I would ask the question, well, let's run some experimentation to find out whether or not the people who receive this offer from me are more likely to share. Now, what it means is that you might have to track them. You might have to ask them the question. You could use social media sometimes to find out people who are sharing this result. But part of what you're looking for is an indication that people will tell you, I have something to talk about here. I would say, provide incentives for people to share this idea. Maybe by sharing the idea, you could give them recognition, a reward of some kind, let them know that they're a special customer when they do this, give them status on a Facebook page. All sorts of things here will give you this probability. Then what you do is try to measure the results of those efforts afterwards. Well, so a split trial testing, a random split testing, is one of the things that you can do. It's easier online. So it's easier when you have a website and you can do it that way. If not, what are some of the things you can do? Sometimes you can try something one week and try something different another. It's an imperfect experimental design, but I would argue that experimentation of any kind is better than getting hung up on the fact that you can't design the perfect experiment. Some sort of trial and then talking to people afterwards will help you to zero in on what's working and what's not. Okay, other questions over here? Oh, okay.
Okay. Rather than registering for a membership now on many sites, you can just check in with Facebook. Does that create this kind of virility factor that you're referring to?
Yes. Yes, as a matter of fact, Ed Baker was very famous in using Facebook registration, social registration, and so on. So what they did was they were just let these results be available to all of their Facebook friends. People are a little more guarded about doing that now than they were back then. And I would say that not all the entrepreneurs in this room are necessarily going to be driving things through a digital marketing approach. But the example that I shared with you about my friend in Washington doesn't require social media or Facebook. It's simply that Facebook lowers the cost of doing that dramatically. But there's still people who get together and talk about things, right? Word of mouth, right, is what we used to call it before there were social media, right? Okay? But I think, some people say, oh, no one is ever going to talk about my product and my experience. Well, that's because maybe you haven't tried hard enough to give them a reason to talk about it, right? And I'm trying to give you the economic motivation to do so. If I said, hey, you should do this to lower your cost of customer acquisition by 80%, wouldn't you pay attention? Wouldn't you say, yeah, I would like to be able to do that. I would like to be able to reach 5 times as many people for the money that I'm spending on customer acquisition. Well, then find a way to build something interesting to talk about into your product or service. Going to Greece on a great vacation, that's like a sucker pitch a little bit. It's pretty easy to get that done. Others are harder, but not impossible. So this promise of virality, I think, is something that you can do. Another question, how about here in the back? All right, not in the back, but about a third of the way back.
Welcome to our country, and thank you very much for the nice talk. At the end of the day, when a customer, a prospective customer, has to make a decision between following a company and using their products based on their vision and their mission and their beliefs, or because you give something back to them, what do you think of these two factors? What is most important? Are they going to follow the values that sometimes they are not, apparent, or they're just going to buy something through the Groupon process, not neglecting the first parameter?
Yeah, okay. So before you give up the mic, let me ask, is this a rhetorical question? No. Or do you sense that you really have the answer yourself? If I would be the person asking you and you were standing...
I know what I would like the answer to be.
So let me say, first of all, that I am a firm believer in creating something of value that addresses a need within a particularly defined set of customers. That, I think, is the secret sauce to entrepreneurship. It's finding something that people care about and being able to figure out who those people are so you can get that solution to them. Now, Groupon can be used in many ways. I will tell you that I don't think it is the first method that I would rely on for customer acquisition. You know why? It's because everybody has to understand the product first, and then what they're doing is they're looking for a lower price to get it. And so those sometimes are people who don't have the same values that you want in your customer base, and it's why that a lot of people who think Groupon will help me drive numbers, right? They'll bring people to my site or they'll bring people to my business. Well, it turns out they're all the wrong people, that it's too costly for you to have them, that there's no positive benefit. You know what else happens? Imagine that you run a Groupon, and now what happens is you fill up your restaurant with people who are giving Groupons, and all of the people who want to come in to pay full price find your restaurant too crowded and they go somewhere else. So that thought exercise is the exercise you should go through with any customer acquisition mechanism. What are we trying to accomplish? What are the economic terms of that? Does it give us access to the kind of customers that we really need? And then I think if it gives you the right customers, you ought to be prepared to pay more for them. Groupon might be cheap. Google AdWords search might be cheap. But that's the thing you need to do. All right, so I'm going over my time now, and what I'll do is I'm going to be available at the break and afterwards and so on, so I hope we'll have a chance. I'm getting someone shaking their head no for this. So what I'm going to do is I turn the mic back over to Christos. All right? All right, great. Thank you very much.
Ευχαριστούμε θερμά τον καθηγητή Latin. Thank you, Jim. That was great. Ίσως η πιο ιδιαίτερη στιγμή της βραδιάς για μένα είναι να προλογίσω τον άνθρωπο στον οποίο οφείλω σε πολύ μεγάλο βαθμό την επιτυχία του δικού μου startup. Βέβαια, μάλλον θα πρέπει να μιλήσω με τον Jim για να δούμε το ποσοστό, δεν ξέρω, όπως έλεγε και πριν, αν είναι 100%, 80%, 70%. Είναι πολύ μεγάλο πάντως. Ο Peter Ziebelman, κατ' επάγγελμα επενδυτής σε εταιρείες startup και παράλληλα καθηγητής του Stanford. Βλέπετε τους καλούς γνώστες της αγοράς του Venture Capital, τους αξιοποιεί το Πανεπιστήμιο. Ο Πίτερ, λοιπόν, υπήρξε ο μέντοράς μου κατά τη διάρκεια της μελέτης για το project που αργότερα έγινε η True Greece. Μου αφιέρωσε αμέτρητες ώρες καθοδήγησης και συμβουλών, τόσο κατά τη διάρκεια των σπουδών μου, όσο και αργότερα. Και αυτό του είμαι προσωπικά ευγνώμων. Πρόσφατα δε, αστειευόμαστε ότι δεν γνώριζε ότι η ενασχόλησή του μαζί μου θα ήταν διαβίου. Παρότι λόγω σχέσης δεν επένδυσε ποτέ στην εταιρεία μου. Αντίθετα από ό,τι έχει συνηθίσει ως τώρα, νιώθω ότι στη συγκεκριμένη περίπτωση το καλύτερο deal μάλλον το έκανα εγώ. Κυρίες και κύριοι, ας υποδεχθούμε τον Peter Ziebelman. Welcome, Peter.
Well, thank you, Christos, for such a very nice introduction. And also a special thank you to the Stanford Club of Greece and to our sponsors for this wonderful event. It's just a great crowd. Let's give them an applause right now. Kalaspera Sas. As you can tell, I am not Greek, and most of my 25 years of venture capital experience has been in the U.S., investing in U.S. companies. During that time, I've invested in some spectacular successes, but I've also invested in some equally spectacular failures. So what I hope to do tonight is share some of those experiences and those lessons from those entrepreneurs, and maybe even some secrets of Silicon Valley. Before I begin with the lessons, I just want to congratulate the entrepreneurs. And how many entrepreneurs are in the audience? Just by show of hand. Okay, that's great. And I think, Jim, I don't know if you already asked, but how many venture capitalists are in the audience here? Oh, we've got a half dozen. Maybe they don't want to be identified. I've seen that happen before. And I've done it myself. But I just want to mention that this really is your moment. In the U.S., some people complain about the economy, and I've heard this also happens in Greece as well, that some people complain about the economy. Maybe. But seriously, during the toughest times, some of the best companies have been created. In fact, if you go back to just 1996, during the recession then, companies that I think you're familiar with, like Travelocity or Expedia, that's when they were born, in 1996, during some very tough times. And more recently, in 2008, companies like Airbnb, and whether you like their formula or not, Groupon was started in 2008. And then, yes, Uber was started in 2009, which was also a very tough time to start a business. So some of the best companies were started during the toughest times. And there are several other reasons why this is a good time. The first reason, and they didn't wire me, so I can't move around like Jim is, so I apologize. But I'll explain from here. The first